Look at that pile of junk in your garage and tell me what you see. Most people see a mess that needs to be hauled to the curb, but they are completely wrong. You are literally staring at a hidden bank account waiting to be unlocked. There is a secret world of niche secondary markets where your discarded scraps are worth more than gold. I am going to show you how to become a modern alchemist and turn everyday waste into pure profit. Forget everything you know about recycling because we are about to change your financial life forever. We have been conditioned since childhood to view our belongings through a very narrow lens. Once an item loses its primary function, we are taught to toss it into a bin and forget it ever existed. This mindset is the only thing standing between you and a significant side hustle. Every year, the average household throws away thousands of dollars in potential revenue without even realizing it. We live in a disposable culture that prioritizes convenience over the inherent value of raw materials. You are currently participating in a cycle that drains your wallet while filling up landfills. The truth is that trash is simply a label we give to things we no longer understand how to use. In the eyes of a specialist, your broken electronics and old clothes are high-value components. Breaking this mental barrier is the first step toward mastering the art of the modern alchemist. This hidden economy did not appear overnight, but it has exploded thanks to the digital age. Global connectivity has turned local junk into international commodities with just a few clicks. What was once considered useless in your town is now a sought-after treasure in another part of the world. Traditional recycling centers often pay pennies for bulk materials, which discourages most people from even trying. However, the niche secondary market operates on a completely different set of rules and valuations. We are talking about specific parts and vintage aesthetics that hold massive premiums for the right buyer. Think about the sheer volume of items passing through your hands every single month. From empty perfume bottles to outdated tech cables, every object has a history and a potential future. You are surrounded by assets that are currently disguised as clutter in your drawers and closets. Large corporations and specialized collectors are constantly hunting for these specific items to fuel their own industries. They rely on people like you to provide the raw materials that are no longer in production. This creates a massive supply gap that you are perfectly positioned to fill right now. Understanding this shift in perspective is what separates the struggling worker from the savvy entrepreneur. You do not need a massive investment or a fancy storefront to start seeing these opportunities. All you need is the knowledge of what to look for and where to sell it. For decades, these lucrative trade routes were reserved for professional pickers and industrial recyclers who kept their secrets guarded. They understood that the value of an object is not in its original purpose, but in its rare components. Now, the digital age has cracked these doors wide open for anyone with a smartphone. Think back to how we used to treat old electronics or vintage packaging just a few years ago. Most of it ended up in a landfill because the infrastructure to connect sellers with specialized buyers simply did not exist. Today, global platforms have turned local garbage into international treasures within seconds. Scarcity is the primary engine driving this new economy of discarded goods. As manufacturing costs rise and raw materials become harder to extract, the parts inside your old devices become incredibly precious. You are essentially sitting on a private stockpile of resources that the world is desperate to reclaim. This is not just about cleaning out your closet for a few extra bucks at a yard sale. It is about identifying the specific high-demand components that the average person overlooks entirely. Once you learn to see the world through this lens, your neighborhood becomes a gold mine. Most people are blinded by the outward appearance of an item and its perceived lack of utility. If a remote control is broken or a toy is missing a limb, they assume the value has dropped to zero. In reality, those individual parts are often worth more than the complete unit ever was. We are witnessing a massive cultural shift where the definition of waste is being rewritten in real time. The barrier to entry has vanished, and the only thing standing between you and a new revenue stream is a bit of curiosity. Let us break down exactly how you can identify these hidden gems before they hit the trash bin. The moment you scan your first item, everything you thought you knew about value will change forever. I remember the exact second I realized I had accidentally thrown away several $100s in vintage tech parts. That realization felt like a punch to the gut, but it was also the spark that ignited my transformation. I found an old, non-working gaming console in the back of my closet that I was about to toss. Instead of dumping it, I took 5 minutes to look up the individual components online. I was stunned to find that the internal laser lens alone was selling for $40 to collectors. This was not just a one-time fluke or a lucky find in a pile of junk. I started looking at every single drawer in my house with a completely different set of eyes. Suddenly, the kitchen junk drawer was not a mess, it was a curated collection of high-demand replacement parts. It is physically painful to calculate how much money we have collectively sent to the landfill over the last decade. Every broken remote, every frayed charging cable, and every empty designer box was a missed transaction. We have been throwing away our financial freedom one trash bag at a time. Once you see the hidden value in the mundane, you can never go back to being a passive consumer. You stop seeing a broken blender and start seeing a high-torque motor and a set of stainless steel blades. This shift in perspective is permanent and immediately profitable for anyone willing to pay attention. The biggest challenge is not finding the items, it is overcoming the urge to just take the easy way out. Your brain will try to convince you that it is easier to just throw it away and move on. You have to fight that instinct and treat every discarded object as a potential business opportunity. Take something as simple as an old, scratched-up vinyl record that will not play. Most people see garbage, but artists see raw material for high-end home decor and jewelry. By simply changing the context of the item, you have increased its market value by 500%. This is the exact moment where your journey as a modern alchemist truly begins. We are moving past the theory and diving straight into the specific categories that will put cash in your pocket today. Get ready, because the items we are about to discuss are probably sitting within arm's reach right now. Look at that drawer full of tangled charging cables and outdated adapters you haven't touched in years. While you see a messy knot of plastic, tech refurbishers see a goldmine of rare copper and proprietary connectors. This realization is the spark that turns a cluttered home into a profitable warehouse overnight. The moment you stop viewing these items as chores and start seeing them as inventory, your entire financial perspective shifts. You are no longer just cleaning, you are harvesting valuable assets that the global market is starving for. This discovery creates a sense of urgency that makes it impossible to ever look at a trash can the same way again. Most people fail because they try to sell the whole unit instead of the high-demand components hidden inside. They get frustrated by low offers for a broken laptop, missing the fact that the individual keycaps and internal fans are often worth triple the price of the machine. Breaking through this wall of ignorance is where the real money starts to flood in. You cannot unsee this potential once you realize that every curb on trash day is essentially a free distribution center. The world becomes a playground of opportunity where your only limit is how much you are willing to pick up and list. Now that the veil has been lifted, it is time to master the specific tools of the trade to scale this into a serious income. Armed with this new mindset, I rushed into my first real attempt at scaling this side hustle into a legitimate business. I started grabbing everything that looked remotely valuable, from old printer cartridges to discarded designer perfume bottles. I thought I was a genius, but I quickly realized that raw enthusiasm alone is not a substitute for a real strategy. My living room quickly transformed into a chaotic mountain of potential profit that felt more like a hoarding situation than a warehouse. I spent hours taking blurry photos and writing vague descriptions that absolutely nobody was clicking on. The reality of the digital marketplace hit me hard when my first 10 listings received 0 views over an entire week. I fell into the common trap of thinking that just because something was old, it was automatically a vintage treasure. I wasted 3 days trying to clean and sell common plastic kitchenware that literally no one on the planet wanted to buy. It turns out that being a modern alchemist requires a very fine filter rather than just a massive net. My friends and family were convinced I had finally lost my mind as they watched me scrub old glass jars in the sink. They kept asking why I was working so hard for what they perceived as literal garbage that should have been at the curb. Their skepticism was a heavy weight, making me question if this was actually a viable path or just a desperate pipe dream. Then came the logistical nightmare of shipping costs that threatened to eat every single cent of my potential profit. I sold a heavy vintage typewriter for $50, only to realize that shipping it across the country would cost me $60. This was a brutal lesson in the importance of calculating weight and dimensions before ever hitting the list button. Navigating the different selling platforms felt like learning a foreign language with constantly changing rules and hidden fees. Each site had its own set of picky buyers who would complain about the smallest scratch on an item clearly listed as 4 parts. I almost quit when a frustrated buyer claimed a broken circuit board I sold was too damaged for their specific project. I eventually realized I could not be a generalist selling random household junk if I wanted to make real, life-changing money. I needed a repeatable system to identify which items were worth the effort and which truly belonged in the bin. I started testing a new hypothesis by focusing exclusively on high-end electronic components instead of general household clutter. This shift led to my first real breakthrough when I stopped looking at the objects and started looking at the serial numbers. I discovered that a specific type of internal cable from a defunct 90s computer was worth more than the entire machine it came from. This was the moment I stopped guessing and started researching my inventory with surgical precision. However, my initial excitement quickly hit a wall of harsh logistical reality. I spent hours meticulously documenting every serial number only to find that many of these supposedly rare components had absolutely zero market demand. I was suddenly drowning in spreadsheets and tiny plastic bags, realizing that raw data alone wasn't enough to guarantee a single sale. My friends thought I had finally lost my mind as my living room transformed into a graveyard of dissected hardware. One neighbor even asked if I was starting an illegal recycling plant or just hoarding high-tech garbage in plain sight. Their skepticism stung, but the real blow came when my first major shipment was rejected because I hadn't understood the strict grading standards of professional collectors. I quickly learned that knowing what an item is worth is only half the battle. You also have to know how to present it to the world. I had the right parts, but my poor photography and vague descriptions were scaring away the serious buyers who actually held the cash. This was a brutal lesson in market psychology that almost made me quit before the real momentum could even build. Every mistake was costing me precious time and shipping fees, eating into my potential profits faster than I could earn them. I had to figure out a way to filter the high-value winners from the time-wasting duds without spending my entire life on manual research. The pressure was mounting to turn this chaotic experiment into a streamlined operation before I ran out of storage space and patience. I had to stop acting like a scavenger and start thinking like the CEO of a global supply chain. The realization hit me that not all trash is created equal, and my lack of a filter was my biggest liability. I was drowning in low-value clutter while the real high-margin opportunities were slipping through my fingers. I began a deep dive into the data to understand why a specific vintage remote sold for $50 while a modern one was worthless. It was not about the age or the condition alone, but the scarcity of the specific internal chips. This investigation revealed a hidden hierarchy of value that most people completely ignore when they clean out their garages. The conflict between the time I spent and the profit I made became impossible to ignore any longer. I was working 80 hours a week for pennies because I was treating every item with the same level of intensity. I needed to ruthlessly cut the bottom 80% of my inventory to focus on the 20% that actually paid the bills. This is where the argument for extreme specialization comes into play for every modern alchemist. You cannot be an expert in everything from Victorian lace to industrial circuit boards without losing your mind. I decided to stop chasing every shiny object and started focusing on the specific niches where my knowledge gave me an unfair advantage. analyzing the secondary market is like studying a living organism that reacts to every technological shift and cultural trend. When a new gaming console is released, the parts for the previous generation suddenly skyrocket in value as people try to repair their old units. You have to anticipate these waves of demand before they even hit the mainstream market. People will still look at you sideways when they see you pulling a discarded vacuum cleaner off the curb on a Tuesday night. They see a broken appliance, but you are performing a mental autopsy to identify the high-value copper windings and the pristine plastic housing. This confrontation between public perception and market reality is where the most significant profits are hidden. I started testing different platforms to see where the most aggressive buyers were hiding for each specific category. I found that while one site was great for quick flips of common items, another was a goldmine for specialized industrial components. Matching the right object to the right audience is the secret sauce that turns a hobby into a high-performance engine. The deeper I went, the more I realized that the real bottleneck was not the supply of items, but my own internal resistance to scaling. I was still doing everything manually, from the cleaning to the listing, which limited my growth to my own physical energy. It was time to stop just finding cash in the trash and start building a system that could run without me. Scaling meant I had to stop treating this like a garage sale and start treating it like a high-stakes logistics firm. I realized that my time was the most expensive resource I was wasting on low-margin items that barely covered the cost of shipping. I had to ruthlessly cut out the clutter that was draining my energy without significantly filling my bank account. This shift led me to investigate the world of industrial surplus and dead stock that companies often pay people to haul away. I discovered that specialized sensors and circuit breakers from old factory equipment can fetch thousands from maintenance managers in a bind. It is a high-stakes game of matching rare, discarded supply with urgent, niche demand in the global market. Most people quit at this stage because they cannot handle the complexity of technical specifications and obscure part numbers. They chase the easy win of a designer label, completely ignoring the dusty box of specialized valves that is worth 10 times more. True wealth in this game is found in the items that look the most boring and intimidating to the untrained eye. I finally understood that value is not an inherent quality of an object, but a reflection of its location and timing. Moving a piece of junk from a cluttered basement to a specialized repair shop across the globe is where the real profit is made. Once you master this situational arbitrage, the entire world transforms into your personal, high-yield inventory. With the system finally in place, I thought I had cracked the code to infinite wealth. My workspace was organized, my bank account was growing, and the process felt like a well-oiled machine. I was convinced that I had reached the pinnacle of the modern alchemist journey and that the hard work was finally behind me. Every listing was selling within hours, and positive reviews were pouring in from specialized buyers all over the world. I had successfully turned a chaotic hobby into a streamlined, high-margin operation that required less and less of my daily intervention. It felt like the story was over and I had officially won the game of turning waste into a fortune. But then, the floor dropped out from under me in a way I never could have predicted. A sudden change in international shipping regulations combined with a major platform algorithm update wiped out my visibility overnight. My once thriving dashboard turned into a ghost town of stagnant inventory and mounting storage fees that threatened to swallow my savings. The crushing weight of the overhead started to suffocate the profits I had worked so hard to build during the previous months. I realized that my perfect system was built on a foundation of sand that could be washed away by a single corporate policy change. It felt like a definitive sign that the dream of turning trash into a sustainable career was finally dead and buried. I started packing up the remaining specialized sensors and industrial valves, preparing to sell them for scrap value just to clear the physical space. The excitement that once fueled my late-night research sessions was replaced by a cold, numbing sense of reality. I was ready to admit that my critics were right all along and that I should just find a traditional, stable job. My home began to look like a normal residence again, free from the clutter of potential profit and technical manuals. The silence in my workspace was deafening, serving as a constant reminder of the failure I was trying to process and move past. I had accepted that the era of the modern alchemist was just an interesting experiment that had reached its natural, disappointing conclusion. As I hauled the last few boxes of worthless components to the curb, I felt a strange mix of relief and profound disappointment. I had proven that you could make money in the short term, but I hadn't proven that the model could survive a shifting global economy. I was one step away from deleting my seller accounts and walking away from the secondary market forever. Just as I was about to toss a final, dusty crate into the bin, I noticed a small, handwritten label on a component I had completely overlooked. It wasn't just a part for an old machine, but a proprietary diagnostic tool for a system that had just been recalled on a massive, global scale. In that split second, I realized I hadn't reached the end of the road. I had just stumbled upon the master key to a market 1,000 times bigger than anything I had imagined. Even with that master key in my hand, the sheer exhaustion of the past few months finally caught up with me. I sat on the cold floor of my garage, surrounded by the ghosts of bad investments and shipping labels that led nowhere. It felt like the universe was finally telling me to pack it in and return to the safety of a predictable life. I began drafting a final message to my small community, admitting that the modern alchemist experiment had finally reached its logical conclusion. I felt a strange sense of hollow peace as I started deleting the complex spreadsheets that had consumed my life for months. The dream was officially over, and I was ready to let this chapter fade into a cautionary tale about the limits of side hustles. Just as I went to hit the final delete key, my phone erupted with a series of high-priority notifications from an industrial procurement forum. A corporate buyer wasn't just looking for that one diagnostic tool. They were desperately seeking an entire inventory to fulfill a massive government contract. I stared at the dusty crate and realized I hadn't just found a spare part, I had uncovered the missing link for a multi-million-dollar operation. The sheer scale of this new demand made my previous attempts at flipping household junk look like a game of marbles. This wasn't about scouring for scraps anymore. It was about positioning myself as the sole provider for a high-stakes industrial crisis. I slowly pulled the crate back into the center of the room, knowing that the real journey was actually just beginning. I didn't just pull that crate back into the room, I tore it open with the intensity of someone who had finally found the map to El Dorado. The corporate buyer on the other end of the screen wasn't just interested, they were desperate, offering a premium that made my previous big wins look like pocket change. This was the moment where the modern alchemist theory transformed from a hopeful concept into a cold, hard, and incredibly lucrative reality. Every hour spent researching obscure serial numbers and every rejection I faced suddenly became the most valuable education I could have ever received. I wasn't just selling a piece of plastic and metal, I was selling the solution to a multi-million-dollar bottleneck that only I had the foresight to solve. The scarcity I had studied so intensely was now working entirely in my favor, creating a leverage point I never thought possible. I stopped seeing myself as a guy with a garage full of junk and started operating as a critical node in a global industrial recovery network. The transition was instantaneous, shifting my focus from the volume of items to the strategic value of the specific problem I was solving. This is where the true power of niche specialization pays off, turning overlooked debris into essential, high-priced infrastructure. As I finalized the contract details, the numbers on the screen began to reflect the true scale of this hidden market. We weren't talking about a few $100s anymore, we were talking about a life-changing sum that validated every single late night and every skeptical look from my neighbors. The trash I had been hoarding was now being insured and overnight to a facility that literally could not function without it. This was the culmination of every lesson learned from the vintage remotes, the copper windings, and the specialized valves I had cataloged over the months. Each of those smaller trades had been a training ground, sharpening my eye to detect value where the rest of the world only saw a disposal problem. All the threads of the narrative were finally weaving together into a single, unstoppable strategy for wealth generation. The secret I realized in that high-stakes moment is that the modern alchemist doesn't actually create value, they simply reveal it to the right person at the right time. By positioning myself at the intersection of discarded supply and urgent, specialized demand, I had bypassed the traditional economy entirely. You don't need a factory or a massive staff when you have the specialized knowledge to identify a diamond in a mountain of coal. Think about the broken medical equipment in a clinic's basement or the outdated server racks in a tech firm's storage closet. These aren't just liabilities to be hauled away, they are gold mines of proprietary components and rare materials waiting for someone with the right lens to claim them. Once you understand the hierarchy of value, every dumpster and every 4 parts listing becomes a potential jackpot. I stood in my garage, watching the specialized courier load the final crates, and felt a surge of pure, unfiltered adrenaline. The system hadn't just survived the shift in the global market, it had evolved to dominate a much larger arena. I had officially turned the ultimate failure into the biggest victory of my life, proving that the only thing standing between you and a fortune is how you choose to see the world. This shift in perspective is the ultimate secret of the modern alchemist. It is not about finding more trash, but about finding the specific trash that solves a high-stakes problem for a high-value client. When you stop looking for things to sell and start looking for solutions to industrial bottlenecks, your profit margins explode into the thousands. I realized that by focusing on these specialized industrial niches, I had completely bypassed the fickle algorithms of standard marketplaces. My value was no longer tied to a platform's rules, but to the undeniable reality of supply and demand in the real world. I wasn't just flipping items anymore, I was providing critical components that kept essential systems running across the globe. Every discarded circuit board and every dusty valve I had collected was a piece of a much larger puzzle that I had finally solved. The journey from a cluttered garage to a global supply chain partner proved that wealth is literally lying in the streets for those who know how to read the labels. This is the moment where your technical curiosity meets market desperation to create a sustainable, high-growth empire. Standing there with a signed contract that dwarfed my previous annual income, the transformation was complete. The world hadn't changed, but my ability to extract value from its waste had become my greatest asset. You are surrounded by hidden fortunes every single day, just waiting for you to stop seeing junk and start seeing the specialized commodities of the future. That signed contract wasn't just a one-time payday, it was my permanent ticket out of the traditional rat race. I moved from a cramped garage to a streamlined fulfillment center where I now orchestrate these high-value trades with surgical precision. The skepticism from my neighbors has vanished, replaced by a quiet respect as they watch the steady stream of specialized couriers arriving at my door. This journey proved that financial freedom doesn't require a fancy degree or a massive startup loan from a bank. It simply requires a shift in your vision to see the gold hidden in the gears of a broken, wasteful world. Today, my mission has evolved into teaching others how to spot these invisible opportunities before they are lost to the landfill forever. However, mastering the physical world of industrial scrap is only the first stage of the modern alchemist's evolution. While I was hunting for physical valves and sensors, I discovered an even faster way to flip assets without ever touching a box. There is a massive digital equivalent to this secondary market that operates at lightning speed with zero shipping costs or storage fees. If you think turning physical trash into cash is powerful, wait until you see how to apply these same principles to the digital landscape. The transition from physical goods to high-demand digital commodities is the ultimate shortcut to scaling your income to the next level. Let's dive into how you can start mining the internet's discarded data for your next major windfall right now.